broadcasting. So I went to RTE and I just applied for every single show there was to be in the audience. And I got into questions and answers at the time. Zero interest in politics, really. Zero. And I'm sitting in the audience like an awful muppet, wondering what's going on. But I'm not even listening to what they're saying. I'm focusing on what the floor managers do, and I'm focusing on the cameras. I'm focusing on the kind of prompts that the host is getting at the time. I just fell in love instantly. And I knew I was going to love it anyway. But when that red light went on, and John Bowman was the host at the time, and how he was so unbelievably serious, but then I'd go to other shows and I'd notice that the host would have better interactions with the audience. And it just became like a game in my mind. So much fun. So I asked the floor manager that day, Johnny McGuigan was his name, now that I remember. I asked the floor manager, could I have a copy of the running order? So the show script, essentially. Okay. And in RTE, and I didn't realize it at the time, I was only getting it to kind of show off and to have it and maybe bring it into the lecturer in college and be like, look, I went, and this was the show that I went to. Nearly framed the thing. And I ended up looking at it, and it had all the phone numbers of all the people that worked on the show. So the director, the producer, the editors, everything, their phone numbers. Couldn't believe it. Okay. Obviously, naturally, the thing to do is, and I was so scared to do it, pick up the phone, the old landlines back in Raheny in Dublin with the long string, I'd try and find a quiet room, and I'd call, and I ended up calling the same guy twice. So I called, spoke to several people. They're like, yeah, just, send in your, they give me the usual stuff, which was send your CV. So you're sending your CV into a dark hole in Donnybrook. You don't know where it's going to go. You don't know if someone's going to get their hands on it. I didn't have anything else to offer, really. I did some work for like the Northside people, and I had a lot of experience in different places, like working in petrol station, like things like that, and a lot of football stuff. But so the guy that I called back actually said to me, you've called me already. You know that. You called me a couple of months ago. And since then, he said, don't call me again. But since then, there's an agency that have been set up to hire people to make tea and coffee. And I couldn't believe it. I'm like, get in, this is perfect. I can make tea and coffee. I know how to do that. So I called the production people. They're still there. Anyone listen to this, get in touch with them, the production people. And I ended up getting an interview. And the interview was to be a runner, again, making tea and coffee on the Olympics in 2004. So I was 19, right. And I got the job. I don't know how I got the job, but I'll never forget. I was there like an hour early. I went to a cafe across the road. My hands were shaking, coffee's going everywhere. And somehow I got the job, and I was just in my element. So, and from that in the door, it's everything, because then you can kind of blossom from within. You can get to know the names of all the directors, producers, on-air hosts. You can learn everything about every role and just study people. And there's always people that get these jobs that just want to have a laugh, that just don't really want to keep their eye on the ball. And if you go there and you get an opportunity to get in the door and you really study everybody, even if it's a job you have no interest in, if you figure out what's going on and why that piece of the puzzle is so important, that's going to stand to you later on in your career in some way. And you don't even know it yet, but it will. And so that's why getting in the door, I think, at RTE was just so important. And then from within, I was able to eventually become a sub-editor. So you're editing the tape. So in that job, for me, I'm sitting next to Graeme Souness or Johnny Giles. And my job, as they're watching a Premiership match, was to log the game. And then they'd be pointing out things like, I'll never forget Johnny Giles telling me, look at this kid here. He's only 16. And it was Cesc Fabregas. And he said, this kid is a genius. Watch him. And this coming from John Giles, one of the best midfielders to ever play in England, and the best for Ireland, was a big deal. So I'm looking at him, and I just start asking questions. What is it about him? What characteristics does he have, do you think? And he said one thing. Arsenal were playing Liverpool. I'll never, ever forget it. And he goes, I'm going to show you two midfielders here. I think this kid is going to be better than Steven Gerrard. And I'm like, that's a big thing to say, because Gerrard at the time was the boss for Liverpool, obviously, and in the Premier League. But he said, watch Fabregas, and his head was constantly on a swivel. And they were playing it out of the back, Arsenal, and Fabregas is like looking for that little bit of space, and he wants to receive the ball. He knows where the pass is going. And Giles was talking about his vision and his awareness on the field. And he goes, if Gerrard had that, he'd be the best midfielder around, but he doesn't. And then he showed me like within 2 minutes another clip of Gerrard, and they were playing, and Gerrard turned his back to the goal, and Gerrard just started walking, and he started looking ahead. But maybe he was being overly critical, I don't know, but either way, it was eye-opening because it was something I'd never noticed before, that Gerrard would turn his back to the ball and kind of just start strolling out, whereas Fabregas is always like wanting to take on that responsibility. Not that Gerrard didn't. I don't want people to think I'm saying that about Gerrard, but it was just eye-opening to be that young and be sitting next to a guy who was obviously an excellent analyst for a long time and an amazing player.
Yeah, and like, he looks at the game in a different way as well. Like, in terms of, when you look at Fabregas and Gerrard, the first thing you think of is goals. Naturally, with every player, you think of the goals they score, or if it's keeper, the saves they've made or something like that. But like, for him to look in a different way, and as you said, you kind of acquire that now and bring it into what you're doing as a sports commentator.
Well, I ended up becoming, years later, in 2012 or 13, I ended up becoming the analyst. So like, again, there's the George Hamilton and there's the Ray Houghton. Like, I ended up being like the Ray Houghton commentator for the Chicago team in MLS on like Comcast Sportsnet, the station there. And then I'm like, wow, how have I just all of a sudden ended up in this position? But it was a lot of experience from sitting next to like Souness and Giles that made me think about the game a little bit differently. And I picked up more than I could read in any book from those two guys, just chatting to them and watching everything but the ball. You know, like you're looking for trends. You don't want to dive in on a player if he makes one mistake, but if he makes two and then he makes three, well, then you're like, okay, there's a trend here. There's something consistent about this. And they were superb, and it just taught me so much.
And it's actually interesting you say that about Souness as well, because Souness he's a man who gives a lot of criticism, but he gets a lot as well. A lot of people don't like the way he goes on, especially he has a set on Paul Pogba for some reason as well. But did he teach you things? Did he teach you things though that you have brought into your career? Like, bad things to say about him for you.
Well, I tell you the biggest thing he taught me, Ryan, never judge a book by its cover, right? When he came into work in RTE for the 2006 World Cup, I was a researcher. That was a big break for me, by the way, getting a job as a researcher instead of a runner for the 06 World Cup alongside Owen O'Callaghan. And Owen and I were still very good friends and had the best of times. But Souness came in. Everybody was afraid of Souness because Souness was seen as this hard-nosed, like tough tackling midfielder, but also a class ball player, but also just a guy who wasn't willing to give Irish guys breaks at club management until Damien Duff. Now, I never wanted to believe that, and people were trying to read into that sort of stuff. But you want to give a guy a break and get to know him a little bit. Now, obviously, he's the on-air talent, as they say in America, and you're only a researcher, so you're not really going to get to know him too well. However, he came in and he couldn't have been nicer. Could not have been nicer, to the point where by day 2 or 3, the runners are having the crack with him. And there was a guy, Porrig Nugent, and Porrig said to him one day, like, "Hey, Graeme, all the production staff against you guys in a 5-a-side will destroy you." And he was getting brave, Porrig, and he said it to him and stood up. He's like, "I'll break your legs in that 5-a-side and we'll also win the game." And he was joking, but it was just the way he went into character straight away, like he is on TV. Yeah. It was just so cool to see and to kind of get to know him a little bit. Like, if I saw him now, he wouldn't know me at all. But back then I was 20, 21, and it was just such a cool time to get to kind of know a guy like that.